The winter wind howled across the Great Plains like a hungry beast, carrying with it the scent of snow and death. Sarah Mackenzie pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched the wagon train disappear into the distance, their wheels cutting deep tracks in the frozen earth. The sound of horses and voices grew fainter until only the wind remained, whistling through the bare branches of the cottonwood trees. She had known this moment would come. The fever had taken 3 members of their traveling party in the past week, and when the red spots appeared on her arms yesterday morning, the decision was swift and merciless. The wagon master, a hard man named Coleman, had given her 1 hour to gather what she could carry. No arguments, no pleas would change his mind. Disease meant death for everyone, and he would not risk 37 souls for one woman who might already be beyond saving. Sarah touched the spots on her forearm, feeling their rough texture beneath her fingertips. They did not hurt, but she knew what they meant. She had seen the same marks on her younger brother before the pox took him back in Pennsylvania. The irony was not lost on her that she had survived the dangerous journey across hostile territory, through river crossings and mountain passes, only to be abandoned here in the middle of nowhere because of something she could not control. The sun hung low in the gray sky, casting long shadows across the prairie. Soon it would be dark, and the temperature would drop below freezing. Sarah looked around at her meager possessions: a small bundle of clothes, her father's Bible, a knife, and a pouch containing the last of her dried meat and hardtack. It was not much to sustain a life, but it was all she had. She began walking toward a cluster of rocks about half a mile away, hoping to find some shelter from the wind. Each step was deliberate and careful as the ground was uneven and partly frozen. Her boots, already worn thin from months of travel, offered little protection against the cold seeping up from the earth. As she walked, Sarah thought about her life back east. She had been a schoolteacher in a small town outside Philadelphia, living a quiet, predictable existence until the letter came from her uncle in Oregon. He needed help with his ranch and promised her a new start in the West. It had seemed like an adventure then, a chance to escape the memories that haunted her in Pennsylvania. Now, alone on the vast prairie with death possibly growing inside her body, that old life seemed like paradise. The rocks provided some relief from the wind, and Sarah managed to build a small fire using dry grass and twigs she found scattered around the area. The flames danced weakly in the gathering darkness, providing more comfort than actual warmth. She rationed herself to a small piece of dried meat and a few bites of hardtack, knowing she needed to make her supplies last as long as possible. As night fell completely, strange sounds began to emerge from the darkness beyond her small circle of firelight. The howl of wolves in the distance made her grip her knife tighter. She had heard stories of what happened to people left alone on the frontier, tales that wagon train members whispered around their own fires: wild animals, hostile tribes, starvation, exposure. There were countless ways to die out here. But Sarah Mackenzie had not survived 26 years, including the loss of her parents and brother, to give up without a fight. She fed more grass to her fire and settled back against the largest rock, keeping her knife within easy reach. If death wanted to claim her, it would have to work for the privilege. The night stretched endlessly before her, filled with the sounds of the wild frontier. Somewhere in that darkness, unseen eyes might be watching, calculating, waiting. Sarah did not know that among those watching eyes were a pair that belonged to someone who would change her fate entirely. She did not know that her story of abandonment was about to become something far different than what anyone, including herself, could have imagined. Running Eagle had been tracking the wagon train for 3 days, moving like a shadow across the landscape his people had called home for generations. His horse, a paint stallion named Thunderwalker, moved silently through the tall grass, trained for stealth and war. The Lakota warrior was not planning an attack. His small band was too few for such an undertaking, but rather gathering information about the white settlers' movements through their territory from his position on a ridge overlooking the prairie. Running Eagle watched through the afternoon as the wagon train made an unexpected stop. Through his brass telescope, taken from a cavalry officer in a previous encounter, he observed the heated discussion among the travelers. Even from a distance, he could read the tension in their body language, the way they gestured and pointed at something near one of the wagons. When the wagons began moving again, leaving behind a solitary figure, Running Eagle felt a mixture of curiosity and disgust. He had seen this before. the white settlers abandoning their own when convenience demanded it. His people would never leave a member of the tribe to face death alone, regardless of the circumstances. It spoke to a fundamental difference in values that Running Eagle found difficult to understand. As darkness approached, he made his decision. Against the advice that his war chief grandfather had given him about avoiding contact with white settlers, Running Eagle guided Thunderwalker down from the ridge toward the abandoned woman. He told himself it was merely to satisfy his curiosity about what could drive people to such cruelty. But something deeper motivated his actions. The woman had managed to start a small fire among the rocks, and Running Eagle could see her huddled form in the flickering light. She held herself with dignity despite her obvious fear and desperate situation. Her movements were careful and purposeful as she tended the fire and arranged her meager possessions. This was not someone who had given up hope, even though hope seemed like a luxury she could not afford. Running Eagle dismounted about 50 yards away and approached on foot, moving with the silent grace that had made him one of the most respected scouts in his band. He wanted to observe her more closely before making his presence known. The woman appeared to be ill. He could see her shivering even near the fire, and her movements suggested weakness. Perhaps this explained why her people had abandoned her. As he crept closer, a twig snapped under his moccasin. The woman's head turned sharply toward the sound, and her hand moved immediately to the knife at her side. In the firelight, Running Eagle could see her face clearly for the first time. She was younger than he had expected, with auburn hair that caught the flame's glow and green eyes that held both fear and determination. Despite her obvious illness and abandonment, she sat straighter, ready to defend herself. Running Eagle made a choice that would alter both their destinies. Instead of retreating back into the darkness, he stepped forward into the circle of firelight, his hands visible and empty of weapons. The woman gasped and scrambled to her feet, knife raised, but she did not run or scream. Instead, she stood her ground, studying him with those remarkable green eyes. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the small fire. Running Eagle took in her proud bearing despite her desperate circumstances. The way she held the knife with knowledge of how to use it. The intelligence in her gaze as she assessed this new threat. The woman, for her part, seemed surprised by his appearance. He was not the savage her people's stories had led her to expect, but rather a tall, powerful man with kind eyes and an air of natural authority. "You speak English?" she asked finally, her voice stronger than her physical condition suggested it should be. "I speak your tongue," Running Eagle replied in carefully pronounced English, learned from traders and missionaries who had passed through their territory over the years. The woman nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders but the knife remaining ready. "Are you going to kill me?" Running Eagle considered the question seriously before answering. "Your people have left you to die. Why would I need to do what the winter will accomplish?" It was a harsh response, but honest. The woman seemed to appreciate the directness rather than take offense. She studied his face in the firelight, searching for something, perhaps sincerity, perhaps mercy. "Then why are you here?" she asked. Running Eagle found himself without a ready answer. Why was he here? Curiosity? Some sense of honor that demanded he not simply watch another human being die alone? Or something else entirely? Something he was not yet ready to acknowledge even to himself. "I do not know," he said finally, and the honesty of that admission surprised them both. The night hours passed slowly as Sarah and the Lakota warrior maintained their careful distance around the dying fire. Neither spoke much, but both remained alert, studying each other when they thought the other was not looking. Sarah found herself fascinated by the quiet dignity of this man who could have easily killed her but instead chose to simply share the warmth of her small fire. Running Eagle had introduced himself with his English name, John, learned from the missionaries. He explained that his people were camped several miles to the north, moving toward their winter grounds. When Sarah asked why he was alone, he told her about his scouting duties, his responsibility to watch for threats to his band. She wondered if she qualified as such a threat, sitting here shivering and probably dying. As the temperature dropped, Sarah's condition worsened. The fever that had been manageable during the day now ravaged her body, causing her to shake uncontrollably despite being close to the fire. She tried to hide her weakness, but Running Eagle noticed everything. Without asking permission, he disappeared into the darkness and returned with additional wood and a thick buffalo hide from his horse. "You need more warmth," he said simply. arranging the hide around her shoulders. Sarah wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of independence. But the hide was wonderfully warm and smelled of wood smoke and prairie grass. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it closer around herself. Running Eagle built up the fire until it blazed strongly against the night. Then he sat across from her, cross-legged and patient, like a guardian waiting for something he could not name. Occasionally he would glance toward the darkness, listening to sounds that Sarah could not distinguish from the general chorus of night creatures. "Why did they leave you?" he asked eventually. Sarah touched the red spots on her arm through the hide. "They think I have the pox, the same disease that killed others in our group." She met his eyes across the fire. "They were probably right to leave me. If it spreads, you believe you are dying?" The directness of the question startled her. People back east would have danced around such a topic, offered false comfort and empty reassurances. "I do not know," she said honestly. "Maybe, probably." Running Eagle nodded as if this was a reasonable assessment. "My grandmother knows much about healing. She has seen the spotted sickness before." "Your grandmother? She is wise in the ways of medicine, plants and ceremonies that can fight many illnesses." He paused, studying Sarah's face. "But she is with my people many miles from here." Sarah understood the implication. Even if this grandmother could help her, there was no way to reach her. A sick white woman traveling with a Lakota band would create dangers for everyone involved. It was an impossible situation with no good solutions. "Tell me about your family," she said, wanting to shift the conversation away from her bleak prospects. Running Eagle spoke of his people with obvious love and respect. His grandfather had been a war chief, his father a respected hunter. His mother had died when he was young, and his grandmother had raised him alongside her own wisdom and fierce independence. He had 2 brothers and a sister, all married with children of their own. His band was small but strong, led by a chief who valued wisdom over warfare. In return, Sarah told him about her life as a teacher, about her brother's death and her parents' passing, about the uncle in Oregon who had promised her a new beginning. She spoke of books and learning, of children eager to read and write, of a world that seemed impossibly far away from this cold prairie night. "You teach children?" Running Eagle asked with interest. "I did. Reading, writing, numbers, geography. I loved watching them discover new ideas, seeing their faces light up when they understood something difficult." Sarah smiled despite her circumstances. "It was the best part of my old life." Running Eagle was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Finally he said, "My people could use someone who knows the white man's learning. The world is changing and we must change with it or be swept away." It was a profound observation, and Sarah recognized the weight of what he was saying. This was not a simple warrior speaking, but a man who understood the complex forces reshaping the frontier. She found herself wondering what other depths lay beneath his quiet exterior. The fire began to die down again, and with it, Sarah's strength seemed to ebb further. The fever made thinking difficult, and she found herself drifting between consciousness and dreams. In her fevered state, she thought she felt strong hands adjusting the buffalo hide around her, heard a deep voice speaking words in a language she did not understand but found strangely comforting. When she next became fully aware, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east and Running Eagle was gone. For a moment panic seized her. Had she dreamed the entire encounter? But the buffalo hide was still around her shoulders, and the fire had been built up recently. Near her feet lay a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside the bundle she found dried meat, berries, and roots she did not recognize. There was also a small clay pot containing what appeared to be some kind of salve or medicine. A piece of birch bark bore markings she could not read, but somehow she understood they were instructions for using the medicine. Running Eagle had not abandoned her after all. He had left her with supplies and what might be medicine, though why he would take such a risk for a stranger remained a mystery. Sarah applied the salve to the spots on her arms as she thought the markings indicated, and found that it soothed the irritation immediately. As the sun rose higher, bringing with it a small measure of warmth, Sarah Mackenzie made a decision. She would not simply wait here to live or die. If Running Eagle's grandmother truly had knowledge that could help her, she would find a way to reach the Lakota camp. It might be impossible, it might be suicide, but it was better than dying alone among these rocks. She had no way of knowing that Running Eagle was at that very moment having a heated discussion with his war chief about bringing a white woman to their winter camp. or that her fate was being decided by people she had never met in a language she could not understand. Chief Standing Bear listened to Running Eagle's request with the patience of a man who had heard many impossible things in his 60 winters. The two men sat in the chief's lodge while the morning sun cast long shadows across the camp, and the everyday sounds of tribal life continued around them. Children played between the teepees, women tended fires and prepared food, and men checked weapons and horses in preparation for the day's activities. "You want to bring a sick white woman to our winter camp?" Standing Bear said slowly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "A woman who may carry the spotted death that has killed white settlers. A woman whose people abandoned her to die rather than risk infection." Running Eagle had expected this reaction, but he pressed forward anyway. "My grandmother could help her. You know her medicine is strong." "I know that Singing Crow's medicine is powerful," the chief agreed. "I also know that bringing a white woman here could bring soldiers looking for her, could bring disease that would kill our children, could bring trouble we cannot imagine." He studied Running Eagle's face carefully. "Tell me why this woman's life is worth such risks." It was a fair question, and Running Eagle struggled to find an answer that would make sense to his chief. How could he explain the strength he had seen in Sarah's eyes, the dignity she maintained even in the face of abandonment and death? How could he describe the feeling that her fate was somehow connected to his own, to their people's future? "She teaches children," Running Eagle said finally. "She has knowledge that could help our young ones learn the white man's ways without losing their own. The world is changing, Uncle. We cannot stop it, but perhaps we can shape how our people survive in it." Standing Bear was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, he called for Singing Crow to join their discussion. Running Eagle's grandmother entered the lodge with the quiet authority of someone who had advised chiefs and warriors for more than 4 decades. Her silver hair was braided with feathers and small bones, and her dark eyes held the wisdom of countless seasons. When Running Eagle explained the situation, Singing Crow asked detailed questions about Sarah's condition, the progression of her illness and the appearance of the spots on her skin. She listened carefully to his descriptions and nodded thoughtfully. "This spotted sickness is not always the death disease," she said finally. "Sometimes it is something else, something that looks similar but can be healed. I would need to see her to know for certain." "And if it is the death disease?" Standing Bear asked. "Then she will die whether she is here or there, but at least she will not die alone." Singing Crow's voice was matter of fact, without sentiment, but also without cruelty. "If it is not the death disease, then perhaps there is a reason the spirits brought her to us." Standing Bear looked between his war scout and his medicine woman, seeing the determination in both their faces. He thought of the winters ahead, of the increasing pressure from white settlers and soldiers, of the children in his band who would need every advantage to survive in the changing world. "Bring her," he said finally, "but carefully. If she shows signs of the true death disease, she must be kept separate from the others until we know for certain." Meanwhile, Sarah was discovering that walking across the prairie while fighting fever was far more difficult than she had imagined. She had managed to gather her few possessions and the supplies Running Eagle had left. But after only a mile of travel toward where she thought the Lakota camp might be, she was exhausted and disoriented. The medicine from the clay pot had helped with the irritation of the spots, but it had not done anything for the fever or the weakness that made each step an effort. The buffalo hide was wonderfully warm, but it was also heavy, and carrying it along with her other possessions was draining her remaining strength. She was resting against a lone cottonwood tree, trying to gather energy to continue, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Fear shot through her. What if it was hostile warriors who would not be as merciful as Running Eagle had been? Or worse, what if the wagon train had sent someone back to check on her, only to find her missing and assume she had been captured? But when the riders appeared over a small rise, she recognized Running Eagle immediately. He was accompanied by an older woman whose presence radiated authority and wisdom, and a middle-aged man who carried himself like a leader. They approached slowly, giving Sarah time to see that they meant no immediate harm. Running Eagle dismounted and walked toward her, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "You should not have tried to walk so far," he said. I hope to find your camp," Sarah replied, embarrassed by her obvious failure to travel any significant distance. The older woman dismounted as well and approached Sarah with curious eyes. She spoke to Running Eagle in their own language. and he translated, "My grandmother, Singing Crow, asks permission to examine your illness," he said. Sarah nodded, too tired and desperate to refuse any chance at help. Singing Crow knelt beside her and began a careful examination, looking closely at the spots on Sarah's arms and hands, feeling her forehead and neck, asking questions that Running Eagle translated about how long she had been ill and what other symptoms she had experienced. After several minutes, Singing Crow sat back on her heels and spoke rapidly to the other two Lakota. Sarah watched their faces, trying to read their expressions for clues about her fate. Running Eagle looked relieved, while the older man seemed thoughtful rather than alarmed. "My grandmother says you do not have the death disease," Running Eagle told Sarah. "You have something else, something that can be healed with the right medicine and care." Sarah felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Are you certain?" Singing Crow spoke again, and Running Eagle continued translating. "She says the spirits sometimes test people by giving them something that looks like death but is not. She believes you have been tested and found worthy of life." The chief, whom Running Eagle introduced as Standing Bear, made a decision. Speaking through his war scout, he told Sarah that she was welcome in their winter camp until she recovered her health. In return, he asked if she would be willing to teach some of their children about reading and writing in the white man's language. Sarah looked between the three faces watching her, seeing kindness and wisdom in the offer of something she had never expected: a second chance at life and purpose. The people who shared her blood had abandoned her to die, but these strangers were offering her healing and a place among them. "Yes," she said simply, "I would be honored to teach your children." As they helped her onto Running Eagle's horse for the journey to camp, Sarah realized that her story was not ending as she had expected. Instead, it was beginning an entirely new chapter, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. The Lakota winter camp nestled in a protected valley between rolling hills, where a stream provided fresh water and groves of cottonwood trees offered shelter from the prairie winds. As they rode into camp, Sarah was struck by how organized and purposeful everything appeared. This was not the chaotic, primitive settlement she had been led to expect from frontier stories, but rather a well-planned community designed for survival and comfort during the harsh winter months. Curious faces appeared at teepee entrances as word spread of the white woman's arrival. Children ran alongside Running Eagle's horse, their eyes wide with fascination at this unexpected visitor. Sarah found their interest friendly rather than hostile, though she could see the adults maintaining a more cautious distance until they understood what her presence meant for their community. Singing Crow had prepared a small teepee for Sarah's recovery, positioned close enough to the medicine woman's own lodge for easy care, but separate enough to avoid any risk to others if her condition worsened. Inside, the space was warm and comfortable, with soft buffalo robes covering the ground and a small fire pit providing heat and light. "You must rest now," Singing Crow told her through Running Eagle's translation. "I will prepare medicines to help your body fight the sickness. In 3 days, if you are stronger, we will begin teaching the children." Sarah settled onto the soft robes, feeling safer and more cared for than she had in months. The fever was still present, but already seemed less intense than it had been on the cold prairie. Whether this was due to the warmth and shelter or some psychological effect of having hope again, she could not say. Over the following days, Singing Crow proved to be a remarkable healer. She brought Sarah teas made from roots and herbs that reduced the fever and strengthened her appetite. She applied poultices to the spots on Sarah's skin that gradually made them fade and disappear. Most importantly, she provided constant care and attention, checking on her patient regularly and adjusting treatments based on how Sarah responded. Running Eagle visited daily as well, bringing news of the camp and helping with translation when Singing Crow wanted to explain something complex about the medicine. Sarah began to see different sides of his personality during these visits: his dry sense of humor, his genuine concern for her welfare, and his curiosity about her world back east. "Tell me about the schools where you taught," he said one afternoon as she was feeling well enough to sit up and talk for extended periods. Sarah described the one-room schoolhouse where she had taught children ranging from 6 to 16 years old. She talked about the challenges of managing so many different ages and skill levels, about the joy of watching a struggling student suddenly understand a difficult concept, about the books and supplies that were never quite adequate for what she wanted to accomplish. "Our children learn differently," Running Eagle observed. "They learn by watching and doing. by listening to stories that teach lessons about life and survival. But they will need your kind of learning too, if they are to deal with the white world that grows larger every year. It was during these conversations that Sarah began to understand the complexity of the situation facing the Lakota people. They were caught between two worlds, their traditional way of life that had sustained them for generations, and the rapidly expanding presence of white settlers that demanded new skills and knowledge for survival. On the fourth day, Sarah felt strong enough to begin her teaching duties. Singing Crow declared her no longer contagious, and a group of 8 children between the ages of 7 and 14 gathered in the larger community lodge to meet their new teacher. Sarah was immediately struck by how bright and eager these children were. They listened intently as Running Eagle explained what she was there to do, and their questions showed both intelligence and practical thinking. Unlike many of her former students back east, these children understood that education was not just about reading and writing for its own sake, but about gaining tools that might help their people survive. She started with the basics, showing them how to form letters in the dirt with sticks, teaching them simple English words and their meanings, helping them understand how written language could preserve ideas and information across time and distance. The children proved to be remarkably quick learners, often grasping concepts after just 1 or 2 explanations. One of the older boys, named Swift Horse, was particularly gifted with languages. He already spoke some English learned from traders, and he quickly became Sarah's unofficial assistant, helping translate complex ideas for the younger children and asking sophisticated questions about grammar and pronunciation. "Why do white people write everything down?" he asked one day. "Do they not trust their memories?" It was a perceptive question that made Sarah think about the fundamental differences between oral and written cultures. She explained how writing allowed people to share knowledge across great distances and preserve it for future generations. But she also acknowledged that the Lakota tradition of oral storytelling had advantages too. It was more personal, more adaptable, and created stronger community bonds. As the days passed, Sarah found herself learning as much as she was teaching. The children taught her words in their own language, showed her how they played traditional games, and shared stories their grandparents had told them about the old days when buffalo covered the plains like a dark sea. She also became more aware of Running Eagle's increasing presence in her life. He often stayed after the teaching sessions to help her understand cultural context for questions the children asked, or to share his own observations about how the lessons were being received by the community. There was something developing between them, something neither of them spoke about directly but both recognized. It was more than gratitude on her part or simple kindness on his. In quiet moments when their eyes met across the teaching circle, or when his hand brushed hers as he helped demonstrate something to the children, Sarah felt a connection she had never experienced before. But she also understood the impossibility of such feelings. She was a white woman in a Lakota camp, dependent on their hospitality for her very survival. He was a respected warrior with responsibilities to his people that she could not fully comprehend. Whatever was growing between them existed in a space outside the normal boundaries of both their worlds. Still, as winter settled more deeply over the camp and her health continued to improve, Sarah found herself hoping that her stay with the Lakota would extend far beyond her recovery. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she felt like she had found a place where her skills were truly valued and where she could make a meaningful difference in people's lives. She had no way of knowing that forces beyond the peaceful valley were already moving that would test everyone's resolve and force impossible choices upon them all. The trouble came with the first heavy snow of winter, when a cavalry patrol arrived at the camp under a flag of truce. Sarah was teaching her morning lessons when the commotion outside interrupted their work on writing simple sentences. Through the lodge entrance, she could see uniformed soldiers on horseback speaking with Chief Standing Bear and several other tribal leaders. Running Eagle appeared at the lodge entrance and spoke quietly to her. "You should stay here with the children. Do not let them see your face until we understand what the soldiers want." Sarah felt her stomach clench with dread. She had always known this moment might come, that someone would eventually come looking for the missing white woman from the wagon train. The children sensed her sudden tension and moved closer to her, their young faces filled with concern. "Will the Bluecoats take you away?" asked Little Fox, one of her brightest students. Sarah did not know how to answer honestly without frightening them more. I hope not, she said simply. But if they do, remember what you have learned about reading and writing. Practice with each other, and maybe someone else will come to teach you more. Through the lodge walls, she could hear raised voices, though she could not make out the specific words. The discussion went on for nearly an hour, during which time the children sat quietly, understanding that something important was happening that would affect their teacher. Finally, Running Eagle returned, his expression grim. "They are looking for you," he said without preamble. "The wagon train reported that you had been left to die, but when they reached the fort, the commander sent a patrol to recover your body for proper burial. They found the place where you had camped, but no body and signs that someone had been there recently. What did Chief Standing Bear tell them? That we know nothing of any white woman. That if she lived, she did not come to our camp." Running Eagle paused. "The soldiers do not believe him. They want to search the camp." Sarah's heart sank. She knew that being discovered would bring consequences not just for herself, but for everyone who had helped her. The soldiers would assume she had been kidnapped rather than rescued, and their response would likely be swift and harsh. "I should go with them," she said. "I cannot let your people suffer because of me." Running Eagle shook his head firmly. "Standing Bear has refused the search. He told them that no white soldiers will enter our winter camp uninvited. The soldiers have withdrawn to consider their options, but they will not go far." That night, the tribal council met to discuss the crisis. Sarah was asked to attend, both as the person at the center of the problem and as someone whose opinion might help them understand how the white authorities would respond to different choices. She sat in the circle of firelight, surrounded by faces that had become familiar and dear to her over the past weeks. These people had saved her life, given her purpose, and shown her kindness when her own people had abandoned her. Now her presence threatened their safety and peace. "I know how this will end," she told the council through Running Eagle's translation. "The soldiers will return with more men. They will demand to search every teepee, every hiding place. If they find me here, they will assume I was taken against my will. They will use it as justification for actions against your people." Chief Standing Bear spoke gravely. "We do not give up our guests to those who would harm them. You came to us sick and alone, and we healed you. That creates obligations on both sides." Singing Crow added her voice to the discussion. "The spirits brought this woman to us for a reason. She has given knowledge to our children that will help them in the changing world. To surrender her now would be to waste the gift the spirits provided." But other voices in the council expressed different concerns. Some worried about the safety of their families if the soldiers returned in greater numbers. Others questioned whether protecting one white woman was worth risking the lives of their entire band. The debate continued deep into the night, with passionate arguments on all sides. Sarah listened to the translation of these discussions with growing understanding of how impossible her situation had become. No matter what decision was made, someone would suffer consequences. Finally, Running Eagle stood and spoke with quiet authority. "I propose a different path," he said. "Let me take the woman away from here, far to the north where my cousin's band winters. The soldiers will find no trace of her in this camp, and our people will be safe. When spring comes and the soldiers have forgotten about one missing white woman, she can decide what path her life should take." It was a solution that had not occurred to anyone else, and Sarah could see the council members considering its merits. It would remove the immediate danger to the camp while not abandoning her to an uncertain fate with the cavalry. But Sarah also understood what Running Eagle was offering to sacrifice. He was proposing to leave his own people during the dangerous winter months, to journey across hostile territory with a woman who would slow his travel and increase his risks. If they were caught by soldiers or hostile tribes, both their lives would be forfeit. "I cannot ask you to do such a thing," she said to him directly. "You have already done more than enough." Running Eagle met her eyes across the fire. "You are not asking. I am choosing." In that moment, Sarah understood that whatever had been growing between them had become something deeper and more dangerous than either had acknowledged. He was not just offering to save her life. He was offering to tie his fate to hers, regardless of the consequences. Chief Standing Bear studied both their faces carefully. Reading the emotions, neither had spoken aloud. Finally, he nodded slowly. "It is a good plan. Running Eagle knows the Northern Territories well, and his cousin Grey Wolf leads a band that the soldiers rarely find. But the journey will be dangerous in winter weather." "When must we leave?" Running Eagle asked. "Before dawn," Standing Bear replied. "The soldiers will return at first light, expecting to find you here to question. If you are already gone, there will be nothing to connect this woman's disappearance to our camp." The rest of the night passed quickly as preparations were made for their departure. Singing Crow packed medicines and supplies for Sarah, along with warm clothing more suitable for winter travel than the worn dress she had arrived in. The other women of the camp contributed items they thought might be useful: extra blankets, dried food, small tools that could mean the difference between survival and death on the winter prairie. Sarah said goodbye to her students, fighting back tears as she hugged each child and promised to remember them always. Swift Horse gave her a piece of birch bark on which he had carefully written his name in English letters. The first word he had learned to write. "Do not forget us," Little Fox whispered as she clung to Sarah's neck. "Never," Sarah promised. "And do not forget what you have learned. Keep practicing with each other." Running Eagle loaded their supplies onto 2 horses, keeping everything as light as possible for fast travel. He had traded his distinctive war paint and eagle feathers for the simpler clothing of a traveling hunter, hoping to avoid drawing attention if they encountered other people on their journey. As the first pale light of dawn began to show in the eastern sky, Sarah mounted the gentler of the 2 horses, a steady mare named Quiet Walker. Running Eagle checked their supplies one final time, then swung on to Thunder Walker's back. Chief Standing Bear approached for final words. "Travel safely, my nephew. Remember that you carry the hopes of our people with you, both for your safe return and for the knowledge this woman brings." "I will remember, Uncle." Standing Bear turned to Sarah. "You are no longer a stranger among our people. When you are ready to return, you will always have a place here." The words touched Sarah deeply, but she also understood their weight. She was no longer just a rescued white woman. She had become part of something larger, with responsibilities and connections that would follow her wherever she went. They rode out of the valley as the sun rose, heading north across the endless prairie toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the camp began the process of removing all traces of Sarah's presence before the soldiers returned. Ahead lay hundreds of miles of winter wilderness, hostile tribes, cavalry patrols, and dangers they could not yet imagine. But as Sarah looked back one last time at the only place where she had felt truly valued and needed, she realized that she was not fleeing toward an unknown fate. She was choosing to trust her life to a man who had already saved it once, and who seemed willing to risk everything to save it again. Running Eagle rode beside her in comfortable silence, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. The morning air was sharp and clear, and their horse's breath created small clouds of steam in the cold. It would be a hard journey, but they were together, and for now, that felt like enough. Neither of them spoke of what would happen when they reached Grey Wolf's camp, or what choices they would face when spring returned. The immediate challenge was survival, and everything else would have to wait until they had accomplished that fundamental goal. As the sun climbed higher and the Lakota winter camp disappeared behind the rolling hills, Sarah Mackenzie began the most dangerous chapter of her transformed life, riding north toward a destiny she could not have imagined when the wagon train had abandoned her to die alone on the prairie. The journey north took 12 days through some of the harshest winter weather Sarah had ever experienced. Running Eagle proved to be a skilled guide, finding shelter when the wind became unbearable and fresh water when their supplies ran low. He taught her how to read the signs of approaching storms in the color of the sky and the behavior of wild animals, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death on the open prairie. On the 3rd day, they encountered a cavalry patrol heading south toward Standing Bear's camp. Running Eagle quickly led them into a grove of cottonwood trees where they waited in silence for the soldiers to pass. Sarah held her breath as the blue-coated figures rode by less than 50 yards away, their horses snorting and stamping in the cold air. "They are going to search the camp," Running Eagle said quietly after the soldiers had disappeared. "Will your people be safe? Standing Bear is wise. By now there will be no trace of you ever being there. The soldiers will find nothing except a band of Lakota preparing for winter, which is not illegal even by their laws." Still, Sarah worried about the people who had risked so much to help her. She thought often of her students, wondering if they were practicing their letters and continuing to learn even without her guidance. The responsibility she felt toward them had become one of the driving forces keeping her going through the difficult journey. The weather turned brutal on the 6th day, with driving snow and winds that cut through even their warmest clothing. Running Eagle made the difficult decision to take shelter in a cave he knew from previous travels. even though it meant losing precious time. They spent 2 days waiting out the storm, huddled around a small fire and rationing their food carefully. It was during those quiet hours in the cave that they finally spoke about what was happening between them. The enforced intimacy of sharing warmth and shelter had made their growing feelings impossible to ignore. "When we reach my cousin's camp, there will be questions about who you are to me," Running Eagle said as they sat close together for warmth. Sarah had been thinking about the same problem. "What will you tell them?" "I do not know. The truth is complicated." He looked at her seriously. "Among my people, when a man and woman travel together as we have, it usually means something specific." Sarah felt her heart racing. "And what does it mean?" "It means they have chosen each other, that they are willing to face life's challenges together, to build something new between their two worlds." The weight of his words settled between them, like a third presence in the small cave. Sarah thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. Her abandonment by the wagon train, his decision to help a dying stranger, the weeks of growing understanding and respect between them. "My world and your world are very different," she said carefully. "Yes, but perhaps that is why we need each other. You understand things about the white man's way that could help my people survive the changes coming. I understand things about survival and the old ways that could help you find your place in this new life." Sarah realized that what he was proposing was not just a romantic relationship, but a true partnership between two people from different worlds who had found something valuable in each other. It would be difficult, perhaps impossible, but it would also be real in a way that nothing in her previous life had been. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she said quietly. Running Eagle smiled, the first truly relaxed expression she had seen on his face since their journey began. "I am asking if you would be willing to try to build a life together, knowing that neither of us knows exactly what that life would look like." Sarah thought about her uncle in Oregon, still waiting for a niece who would never arrive. She thought about the wagon train members who had abandoned her, probably assuming she was dead by now. She thought about the safe, predictable life she had left behind in Pennsylvania, and how empty it seemed compared to the rich, complex world she had discovered among the Lakota. "Yes," she said simply, "I would like to try." They reached Grey Wolf's camp on a clear, cold morning when the sun made the snow-covered prairie sparkle like diamonds. The band was smaller than Standing Bear's, perhaps 40 people total, but they welcomed Running Eagle warmly and accepted Sarah with the same generous hospitality she had experienced before. Grey Wolf was a thoughtful leader who listened carefully to their story and understood immediately the complexities of their situation. He offered them a place in his camp for as long as they needed, with the understanding that they would contribute their skills to the community's welfare. Sarah resumed her teaching duties with the children of Grey Wolf's band, while Running Eagle took on responsibilities as a scout and hunter. As the weeks passed, they began to build the kind of life together that Running Eagle had envisioned, one that drew from both their backgrounds and created something entirely new. The marriage ceremony, when it came in early spring, was a blend of Lakota traditions and Sarah's own beliefs. Singing Crow had traveled north specifically to officiate, bringing with her news that Standing Bear's band had survived the cavalry search without incident and that Sarah's students continued to practice their reading and writing. "The spirits knew what they were doing when they brought you to us," Singing Crow told Sarah as she prepared her for the ceremony. "You have brought knowledge to our children and strength to one of our finest warriors. In return, you have found your true home." As Sarah stood beside Running Eagle, speaking vows that committed them to sharing whatever future awaited, she thought about the impossible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been abandoned by her own people and left to die alone, but that abandonment had led her to discover strength she never knew she possessed and love she had never thought possible. The wagon train that had cast her out had continued to Oregon, never knowing that their act of cruelty had become the first step in a story of survival, transformation, and hope. Sarah Mackenzie had become Sarah Running Eagle, teacher to Lakota children, wife to a warrior, and bridge between two worlds that desperately needed to understand each other. Years later, when gray touched her auburn hair and lines mapped the weather and laughter on her face, Sarah would tell their children about the night she sat alone by a dying fire on the vast prairie, believing her life was ending. She would explain how sometimes the worst moments in life become the doorways to the best ones, and how being lost can be the first step toward finding where you truly belong. The little school she eventually established served children from multiple bands, teaching them to navigate both worlds with wisdom and dignity. Her story became part of Lakota oral tradition, told around winter fires as an example of how the spirits sometimes rescue people through the kindness of strangers and the courage to embrace an unexpected path. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when Running Eagle would hold her close and speak of the day's events in the mixture of English and Lakota that had become their private language, Sarah would remember that day on the prairie and feel profound gratitude for the choice he had made to step into her firelight rather than disappear back into the darkness.